Mhm.
Welcome back, WNST, House of Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. It's missing because I'm missing. I'm in parts unknown, but the Orioles have been found. We're going to be on Thursday doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. Back out on the road again, new spot. We're going to be at Captain Larry's on Thursday pre-draft, and then on Friday, we're going to be back downtown at Fadley's remaking what was an opening day thing, but since opening day, those Orioles. Luke Jones joins us now. Luke, I'm going to give you all the credit because, I've left town. They haven't lost since I left. So by the time I get back, the Ravens will be picking football players. Hell, Lamar's liable to have a real contract by then, right?
I don't know if I go that far with Lamar Jackson, but certainly a lot of excitement. I mean, you look at the Orioles, and let's get this out of the way because it's what you see on Twitter anytime anyone's trying to slow everyone's roll about the mojo and how well they're playing. They haven't been playing a murderer's row of opponents. We get that, right? I mean, Detroit's not good. The Nationals are not good. The White Sox are off to a slow start. The Orioles played Oakland before that, and the A's are the worst team in baseball. And by the way, the A's had no problem scoring runs against this Orioles pitching staff a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. So I'll remind everyone of that. But I think what's really come into focus, at least for the short term, is the pitching has been not just better, but much better. Again, not facing the 27 Yankees or the 2023 Tampa Bay Rays, who are still playing at an incredible clip. But when you give up 3 runs over the course of 54 innings, essentially 6 full games, going back to after the first inning of the finale in Chicago last Sunday, you're doing something right. So they're getting better starting pitching, and it always starts with that. Things become that much easier as a baseball team when you get good starting pitching, even when your bats have slowed down a little bit, as they have and as they will over the course of a 162 game season. We know you'll have peaks and valleys in that way, but they're pitching better. The bullpen, after the first week and a half, has really pitched at a much higher level. I think we've mentioned that even going back to before this last week. And, the defense has stabilized a little bit. Maybe not as great as it had been, last season, but certainly better than we saw the first couple of weeks of the year. But hey, 14-7, it's tied for the third best start in team history through 21 games. You're doing something right. And even if you have not played the toughest stretch of opponents, this is what you want to do. Make your hay, beat up on the bad teams that you're supposed to beat, and then we'll see how the chips fall against some of the tougher opponents. But as it stands right now, the Orioles have a great opportunity here with now facing the Red Sox. They'll play Detroit again. They'll play Kansas City, and then it'll pick up then in the first week of May. So right now, plenty of reason to be optimistic, and certainly when you're 14-7 over the first few weeks of the season, it's a heck of a lot better than what we've seen here in recent years with the Orioles as they are on the other side of this long-term rebuild.
Look, man, it's not going to always be, as easy as going from almost being no hit and perfect game to walk off wild pitches, right? I mean, it's been a wild mix of things, but more than that, I want to speak to the excitement around the team and Little League and people coming out a little bit. And I started thinking about this with the Little League thing, and I don't want to be flippant about it. And I'll probably ask you this, and I'll ask everybody in the audience, because if I were taking phone calls today, this would be where we are. People get excited. They took their kids down to the ballpark, and I'm away. I'll be back very soon, but I've been away. I'm just watching it all happen and seeing the Little League thing happen on a Sunday. I didn't know it was happening. I don't have a kid in Little League. I didn't see the promotion for it, whatever. There's a lot of people out there. I saw you were out there taking pictures stuff. I'm thinking to myself, I don't have any pictures of me on the field of Memorial Stadium. I was on the field of Memorial Stadium one time as a kid, and it was when I one pitch hit and run, and then after that, as a journalist later in life, I didn't play. I wasn't on the Brooks Robinson team or the Crown Gasoline team or any of that stuff. And then I think about the modern era, how many young people have run the bases, have been at the stadium, that there was a level of arrogance for this franchise. And I see it with the football team. It's draft week this week. Quarterback ask out and they act like it's nothing. It's something. And for the baseball team to be outperforming the football team, at least in the minds of people, and giving people something excited about. But I thought about this. I wonder, do you have a picture of you? Did your dad get to take you? Didn't probably, because the baseball team had a level of arrogance about all of that for a long, long time. And I'm thinking, well, at least that's gone. With whatever has happened to Camden Yards over 31 years, going from full to empty, from good baseball and a reputation to whatever they have to rebuild again in this way and make Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman the new Cal and Eddie, the new Brooks and Boog, the new, I don't know. I mean, the new JJ Hardy. I mean, for era, it's been a decade now since a lot of that, right? So I would just say for the modern era to have a day where you take your kids out there and they play hastier baseball and they win and it's exciting and they go home and they might want to come back. I That's the part that I'm paying attention to as a 55-year-old. It's not, I like the pitching story. That'll play itself out over the next 135, 140 games. But to me, to have people interested in it again and me interested enough to take vacation time and be forced into working because they're playing good baseball, but not that, but because people care. And I'm sensing at the beginning of a year, and we talked about getting off to a good start, talking about getting off to a good start since Earl Weaver, right? Since Hank Bauer. And they've actually gotten off to a good start. There's a real lifeline here, a chum line, a troll line to bring fans along, to have me on vacation figure out how to get the game. Other people are going on vacation. They're going to want to get the games. All of these issues that you talk about that all seemed like it didn't matter when they weren't winning. Now they're winning, and I see people bitching about the food, not the prices, the quality of the food, because they go down there and they see ads in the BAL, and it's like new food, new everything. People are having a new experience, a new day with Oriole baseball, and you've been down there witnessing that, where it's filling up again with people who are coming back for a different purpose than they used to, which was just the bobblehead. They're coming back now because they really believe the team can win, and they want to buy in.
Yeah, I think they're getting there. And let's be fair. Let's point out, they didn't draw incredibly well on Friday night. Saturday, the forecast looked awful. From what I understand, there were a lot of ticket exchanges. They only had 12,000 people there, and announced attendance. It was less than that just because it was lousy. But you look at Sunday, it was announced at just under 37,000. That was legit. I mean, I took pictures of in the third inning. It might have been a little fuller than maybe it was on opening day, because you know how much opening day riffraff there is at the local establishments, and young kids not even making it into the game or only going for an inning or two. But it was a really nice crowd. And what you just mentioned as far as Little League Day, it's something they've done for a number of years. I mean, obviously that was disrupted with COVID for a couple years, but I think it was announced it was right around 14,000 Little League softball players and their coaches, and obviously family members coming with them. So a
How much
big
should it
boost.
cost of those people to come? Do you even know? Is it a
I,
$10, $20? Like, obviously it's not full price, because if it's full price, they probably don't all come.
yeah, I'm not sure. I'm sure there's probably some kind of group rate, because I mean you think
Whatever
about
it
it.
is, it's a promotion I noticed, right?
Mhm.
That I saw that was like, hey, I don't have a picture of me running the bases. Greg Spaniak has that one now with his kids, right? His kids have been down there. That I don't know that sucks you in, but I think that's something as a 55-year-old that may one day have your niece at the ballpark with me, or my own grandkids at the ballpark with me. Well, my kid doesn't care. My kid's your age. My kid's not like running down there, has to go to a ball game. It's left him, and that it's left the Aparicio family in that way. I've seen plenty of other families it hasn't left. The Molars, the Enochs, they take their kids, their grandkids on a Sunday. Right here, right now, I've been with you 15 years. How many Aprils on draft week has the season been over? Like most, and that's not the case this year. And that's probably not good news for the Ravens, but it's great news for the city. It's great news for anybody that wants to come downtown and have an excuse to come downtown. That's not Adam Sandler, who was down. I mean, I saw people all weekend downtown for Chicago on Friday. I mean, I see it and feel it, and I'm one of those people. I would have been in Chicago, and I'm wondering when the Orioles are gonna suck me in and make Dennis take me down there, or Leonard Raskin and I'll run down there, whatever. But there is a point where, like, you're not going down there for the bobblehead or the chili dog at this point. You're going because, like, Rutschman's playing, Henderson's playing, Mullins is playing. You got players you've been watching play a couple of years that maybe you're an Austin Hayes guy. Maybe you're going to wait for Grayson Rodriguez to pitch and go that night, or maybe you like Dean Kramer. I don't know, but you're starting. I like Mateo, right? So like you all start to, you get a player who does something, and you want to go see him play, and you're looking forward to the next Red Sox game. Been a long time since we've had that sort of days of our lives kind of soap opera around here. And you mentioned pitching. Let's get onto the field a little bit. Um, can they pitch better? Is it better when they play 5 days a week? I mean, less innings is better, but they're going to need people for these innings, and it's looked more capable, certainly in the last week.
Yeah, no question. And again, we understand that they haven't been facing the most imposing of lineups. They've played a Detroit Tigers team that has a 40-plus-year-old Miguel Cabrera who didn't even play the last couple games. Jonathan Scope is not what he used to be, although he stung the ball multiple times on Sunday and had little to show for it. But yeah, they pitched much, much better this last time through the order. I mean, it started really with Grayson Rodriguez in Chicago last Sunday. Remember, he gives up 4 runs in the first inning. It did not look good. And he settled in and he tossed 4 shutout innings. And that began this stretch of 3 runs allowed in 54 innings. I mean, that's essentially 6 full games that they allowed 3 runs. And I get it. It's against the Nationals and it's against the Detroit Tigers, but they're still Major League Baseball teams. They still have hitters who can hurt you if you're not going to make quality pitches. So to see Dean Kramer after a brutal first 3 starts for him that reminded you a lot of the 2021 Dean Kramer, he looked a lot like the guy we saw over the second half of last year. Kyle Bradish comes off the IL. Looks like the guy we saw over the second half of last year. Kyle Gibson was excellent on Saturday night. Missed more bats than you're used to seeing him do really over the course of his career. So that was good to see. So, Tyler Wells pitched well, and Rodriguez on Sunday, wasn't even the best version of Grayson Rodriguez we've seen stuff wise. He didn't miss quite as many bats, but he was able to get through that, and he continued to hang zeros on the board. So when you do that, it makes your bullpen look that much better. Got to give a shout out to Yennier Cano, who they just called up recently, and he's kind of morphed into, at least for the time being, their 8th inning guy, along with Brian Baker, where he's done a really nice job. Another big guy out of the bullpen to complement and bridge the gap to Felix Bautista. So the pitching's been really, really good. So, to piggyback on the point you were talking about with Little League Day and people coming out to the ballpark and identifying with someone, Adley Rutschman being the most popular, right? Gunnar Henderson, Grayson Rodriguez, Jorge Mateo, who you mentioned, who's off to a fantastic start until this recent hip issue that cost him a couple games. I think all of those things are attracting people to the ballpark. There's some curiosity that's piqued. And then when you see 37,000 people at the park on Sunday, and Eduardo Rodriguez has a perfect game into the 7th inning, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, if I don't want to see this kind of history as an Orioles fan. But then they win the game, and they win the game despite only picking up 3 hits. That's the kind of experience that for all those people who might have been going to their first game on Sunday, they kind of see, and they see what kind of atmosphere. And when Santander hit the game-tying double and Mateo comes around from first base, it sounded like a playoff atmosphere as far as how loud the crowd got. That's the kind of experience. And Buck Showalter talked about this all the time early in his tenure when the Orioles were trying to find any kind of a footprint at that point after 14 losing seasons. He talked about it a lot. When we have people in the ballpark, we really want to win. We want to win every night, but we really want to win that night or that afternoon, because that's going to have that 10-year-old or that 25-year-old who hasn't been to a game in a few years because they've stunk. They say, hey, I want to come back. That was fun. Even if the food and the concessions and the beer was too expensive and all that, it was fun and it was a good product. And these guys are young and exciting, and they're playing good baseball. And hey, other than the Rays, we're playing as well as anyone in the AL right now. So I think when you have that kind of experience, look, they've got a long way to go. They're not going to continue to win at a 667 clip. I think that's obvious once they start playing some tough. Yeah, I don't think they're going to win 108 games. I'm going to be bold and say that. But again, when you start pitching better the way that we've seen them pitch better, and if the starting rotation is better as it's been over the last week, not going to be this great moving forward, but better, it's going to make the bullpen that much better. and an offense that I still think, as the year goes on, is going to hit the ball and be above average. It's going to put you in position to beat up on the teams that you should beat up, as we've seen over the last week, and hold your own against those tougher opponents that are ahead. So I think that's a formula that leaves this team firmly in the mix of it over the course of the season. And Brandon Hyde said it even Sunday morning. He said, "Look, I'm pleased with the start. I'm pleased with the fact that we're off to this kind of start, but the mark of a true quality team is getting better over the course of the season." And we saw that. This team was not very good over the first 6 weeks last year. They were pretty bad. And when Adley Rutschman arrived and some other guys started to arrive and other guys started to play better, we saw this team play at a much higher clip the rest of the year. So that'll be the challenge. Again, they're not going to keep up a 14-7 kind of a win rate, because they are going to play tougher opponents here in the coming weeks. But as it stands right now, they've done a really nice job with, I don't know, call it the soft underbelly of their schedule. They've certainly taken advantage of it.
Luke, I'm away on vacation. Welcome in everybody that just joined us. We're going to be doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery. I didn't bring any lottery tickets on vacation with me to hold them up, or my Window Nation hat, but I'll have all that on Thursday at Captain Larry's downtown. We're getting ready for the football draft. Friday, we're at Fadley's in the morning after the draft, so we'll have some fun here. Obviously, Luke's going to be covering the draft all week. You could follow him at Baltimore Luke. So this is where, I wonder why people that listen to Ed Norris would want to listen to Ed Norris talk about baseball. I mean, you and I have forgotten more about baseball than anybody, but I'll say this on a Sunday when Eduardo Rodriguez is about the perfect game team. I'm old enough, and I have a couple gray hairs in here. They're coming out. That I remember when Eduardo Rodriguez was an Oriole prospect and was given away. And we can make what we will about that deal that could have netted them a championship and a parade at some point, right? But the Jonathan Scope thing's even more interesting to me, because I saw Mike Elias do a baseball chat with executives 2 weeks ago, and it was a week into the season, and all of these old dudes are at, when are you signing Rutschman long term? And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I was the guy on the radio saying they should probably give Scope $80 million and hold on to him. And it really is amazing all these years later that there's a game, and Cabrera obviously, won for the ages and all that. And I was at the 2003 World Series. I remember all of that, and Clemens. And so a game, baseball has such history. And when it starts to come back and matter again, and when your old flames, Jonathan Scope, who could have been an Oriole for life, right? Would have been just as easy to give him $80 million as it was to give Chris Davis whatever ungodly amount. I'm still doing the math on that. I don't know how much they gave me. I'll have to put a number on that. It'd be like a new 21-31 or something. We did the math on that 2 weeks ago, and it's still astonishing the amount of money. But Jonathan Scope's one of those guys. And then Rodriguez, another sign that the Orioles did draft. I always say that about Ozzie and Eric DeCosta. You get pissed because they lose players, and I'm like, they're drafting. They just had another guy signed for $60 million somewhere else this offseason. The baseball here has been bad, but then Rodriguez and Scope come in, and you're like, well, not everything stunk. But then you're like, well, they got rid of Rodriguez. And then you do the math on it. You try to explain to your 12-year-old kid on Little League Day how this guy used to be the guy in the organization. It was an interesting game from a historical perspective in that way. And there was almost some historical perspective for all these young people, because they almost didn't get a hit.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, with Eduardo Rodriguez, I mean, you just mentioned it. I think it's tough to go back and look at that trade and say, oh, the Orioles shouldn't have done that. I mean, Andrew Miller was really, really good for the Orioles that postseason. I mean, it wasn't his fault.
Hey, you were looking for an eighth inning guy a minute ago. He used to wipe out like seventh and eighth inning.
Right, exactly. I mean, you're talking, kind of an old school fireman that you could just bring him in, and I mean, he was getting 6 outs for you, getting 7.
A little Sparky Lyle in him, he did.
Yeah. So, but Eduardo Rodriguez, to his credit, and he's had some health concerns, and even going back to during the pandemic, but he's carved out a really nice career for himself. And by the way, and I can't take credit for this because I saw a couple people mention this on Twitter. He's the kind of guy that I'm guessing the Tigers are going to be looking to move at the deadline. we've
Maybe
talked
this is
about
like
this.
bringing Eddie Murray back. Maybe.
Maybe Eduardo Rodriguez is a stretch run kind of acquisition. I mean, we know the Orioles have the prospects to do something like that, and ultimately we're going to be talking about this because there aren't enough chairs for all their prospects. We know all the guys aren't going to pan out in the minors, but guys will. But is there going to be a seat for them? And that's where you look at this thing and look at what the Astros did and Mike Elias and Sig Meidel's time there, and knowing what they saw there, that you could acquire an Eduardo Rodriguez. So who knows? Maybe it'll come full circle in that way. But he was really good on Sunday, and it's one of those cases. And you and I have talked about this on the air in all my years, both as a fan who went to hundreds of games and now as a media member who's been to hundreds of games. I still have yet to see a no hitter and certainly a perfect game in person. Whenever you get to you're into the seventh inning and someone's perfect, you don't want it to be on the Orioles being on the bad side of it, but boy, there's still that appeal of wow, I could see something really special today. It was starting to feel really interesting, but
Did I ever
give me
tell you about the time I walked out of the no hitter in San Diego?
you have told me about that. Absolutely. It's certainly one of those situations where you're just, again, you feel a little torn in one of those cases, but he was good, but the Orioles, Grayson Rodriguez and the bullpen behind him pitched very, very well, and they did just enough. And hey, what Englert throws a wild pitch, and there you go. You've swept the series, and you've won 6 in a row, and life is good. But it is fun to kind of look at this thing full circle now. I don't even want to say full circle because they still need to get back to the playoffs. And where they are right now is not, we talked about this last year. That wasn't the culmination. That's kind of the beginning. If your rebuild's worth its salt, this shouldn't be the high mark. This should be where you're starting. But when you do look back at some Orioles of the past, whether it's a prospect or, Jonathan Scope, who, let's face it, he's kind of, I don't want to say circling the drain, but his career has not gone in a great direction the last couple years, to the point where he's batting at the bottom of the order for a Detroit team that's not scoring many runs. So, but you see those guys and you kind of think, okay, could things have turned out differently? Could you have signed this guy, that guy? I mean, Manny Machado is the one we'll talk about and continue to talk about it for years and have talked about it for years. But you kind of see those guys and you remember and you're reminded that this moves quickly, and this thing is the wheel's always churning. And we talk about this a lot. You mentioned with the Ravens, with different guys who leave and come back and play against them or come back years later. There's a similar sentiment there that it's very it's not for long, right? And you think of those guys and you see them now, and you kind of look at where the Orioles are, and by the time they had gotten to 2018, it was over. It was over at the end of 2017. And they did at that point what they should have done a year sooner, but they did it. And they took their lumps, a lot of them. But
I
they
only
now
bring the
are,
Jonathan Scope thing up because it would have been a mistake signing him, right?
yeah,
And that
yeah,
way, for that money would have been better served to give to Machado. And you remember those guys were frickin' frack, right? Like that was a close team that we look back and say, what happened? Well, it all fizzled out. And now when you're like, okay, who are they giving the money to? We didn't even want anything. And fans are already pulling Mike Elias up and saying, when are you paying the kid? Don't have this happen to what's going on with Lamar and the Ravens this week. And I'll let you transition into that for a couple of minutes because we'll have more conversations as we get closer to the draft and up on the draft and through the draft on Thursday night. But this is interesting that the football team's the team that everybody asks out of. They all want to be traded away from now, like first round draft picks. This is an interesting week for the Ravens, right? And it's going to be an interesting weekend for the Ravens too, for both of these teams and where they sit, because this is weird. Over 31 years of doing this and 27 years now having a football team around here. There haven't been a whole lot of Aprils where we're talking about the baseball team before the football team drafts.
yeah. And let's be clear. I mean, the Ravens aren't playing any games this week. They're not playing any games next week. They're not playing any games next month or 2 or 3 or 4 months from now. So that's part of it. But you're right. And that's one thing I said going into this baseball season, that the Orioles being in a unique position, not just on the heels of what they did last year, but the Ravens being in, unique territory. I don't think things are necessarily as dire for the Ravens as they look or they feel at times this offseason. But I'm not going to make light of the Lamar situation until at the very least, he signs his franchise tag, which doesn't feel like is going to be anytime soon. So there's going to be many months of that.
I
But
often
as
wonder
far,
what advice he's getting now, or what
yeah,
he's thinking right now, right? Because this this has just been a tumultuous offseason, and it's not even we're not even through April, really.
right, right. And I'm not sure. I don't think you and I'm thinking we haven't had a chance to talk about the Jalen Hurts deal and certainly what that means. And a deal that, by the way, look, fairly similar to what the Ravens reported offer was to Lamar last August and September. But that's old news at this point in time.
I
But
don't think the Ravens have ever tried to rip Lamar off. And
no,
I'm not, I don't get along with John and Eric these days because they're
Mhm.
liars and they have no integrity. So I'll say that out loud every time it comes up because I've earned the right to say that they're liars who have no integrity. But that being said, I don't think they've dealt with Lamar without integrity. I think Lamar was important to them, has always been important to them. They've treated him like but this has been a really weird marriage without the agent. And for this specific kid and his talents and how unique it is, that this is still off the rails for me as an organization. And I don't blame the Ravens. I'm not a guy saying because the Ravens have always gotten deals done. This isn't on them to me. This is on him and on him betting on himself like Flacco did. And we all were cool with that 10 years ago, right? That's what this is in his mind. I'm betting on me and I'm not going to sign for less. And I'm not going to have all these rich guys get together and the Players Association. None of that was going on with Flacco, right? With Flacco, it was very cut and dried. I'm going to go win a Super Bowl and you're going to pay me. And if I don't, somebody else will pay me and it's okay. It's business. This has been different with Lamar, and I don't, especially to the fans saying I don't want to be here, and like that makes this uh treacherous. And again, back to the money and Jalen Hurts, the original point, which is I don't think the Ravens have ever really screwed him. And I think if for players and the media to play that role that they tried to lowball him, I think they've always been where the market needed to be. And I think he would have gotten a lot more money after 19 because they would have had to give him that money. If he would have signed earlier, he would have gotten richer quicker and he could be holding out now and saying, but then again, he wouldn't be holding out now because he hasn't played a playoff game he hasn't been around after November. He would have no leverage to be holding out at this point, especially if he had $112 million in the bank and they had paid him. So there's a lot of ways this could have gone, but this isn't good for any of them. Again, I don't think this is good for any of them.
yeah, I think it would be hard to argue that. One thing, keep in mind, he wasn't eligible until after 2020. And just a little bit of housekeeping there. But it is crazy, and I mentioned this in my latest 12 Ravens thoughts at BaltimorePositive.com. If you think about the timing of Joe Flacco's deal, remember he signed, of course, a few weeks after winning the Super Bowl. Joe Linta had all the leverage against the Ravens, and Joe got what, 6 years, $120.6 million, which is crazy to kind of think that's what the term was then and what the
Really
money
enough for
has become.
McDonald's cheeseburgers as I remember.
Yeah, chicken nuggets, whatever it was, the McNuggets or whatever. But what's crazy about that though, Nestor, is Joe Flacco was back at the table 3 years later because the Ravens, the way that deal was structured, they had to extend and they had to redo it. So think about the timing of this. If they had gotten a deal done with Lamar in the offseason of 2021, we would already potentially be talking about next offseason being him getting another extension or, renegotiating, whatever. He could have been looking at his potential next bite at the apple already. So that's where you hear a lot of people talk about waiting and the price goes up. And that's true. The price always does go up for quarterbacks. Even if we're going to acknowledge the Deshaun Watson deal at this point, it being painfully obvious that that's the outlier. But in terms of average annual value and all those things, the price always goes up. However, when you keep delaying and you keep waiting and you keep waiting, what else are you delaying? Your next potential bite at the apple. So you're talking about Lamar at 26. That's fine. Okay. I mean, he's still in the midst of his prime, right? I mean, even if we're not going to make too much of the last couple of years with, didn't have these catastrophic injuries, but injuries that kept him out multiple
Any
games.
forecaster,
But
even a qualified agent would say his prime's shorter than everybody else's prime.
yeah, I mean, I think right, and that's not to say he's going to be done in a year or 2 years, but and it's not to say he's going to be out of the league at age 30, but you do wonder how it will age. So from that standpoint, how wise is it to delay your next potential bite at the apple? And that's where you look at this thing and say, the money that that cash that he could have already banked over the last couple years, is he going to get that a few more years down the road after waiting? I mean, he's going to get a big deal, whether it's with the Ravens or whether it's with someone. He's going to get a big deal. But is he going to maximize his long-term earnings with how he's played this out the last couple of years? It's becoming more and more difficult to think that that's going to happen, short of him having an unbelievable MVP kind of season and takes the Ravens at least to, say, the AFC Championship game. And even then, what exactly are we talking about there? It doesn't mean that someone's giving him the Watson deal, but I'd also say if he's going to have that great deal, how well does that mesh with the potential for a holdout and not being around for the spring and training camp and all that? So you said it. I mean, it's messy. It's messy all the way around. Even putting aside who you want to blame or how much blame you want to give any party in this, it's messy. And it's not what you want when you're trying to win win championships and win playoff games and get to a Super Bowl. I mean, it's not conducive to that. So that's where you look at this draft. And to go back to what you asked me a few minutes ago, you said, what if I were Lamar, what would I be looking at? I mean, you're kind of looking to see if there's a team that's targeting a quarterback in the draft and they strike out, the board doesn't fall the way they want to, the trade that they make to move up isn't there, whatever it might be. And is there a team that pivots then and says, all right, let's make a run at Lamar? I've said for a while, I don't see that, but I also don't want to say that there's a 0% chance of that. So if you're Lamar, it kind of feels like it's the last checkpoint, so to speak, in terms of seeing if there is another team that will, quote, rescue him from the Ravens and will offer more than the Ravens have offered. So we'll see. Again, our curiosity will be satisfied in that way. But if you're going to ask me what I think is going to happen, I think it's going to be a whole lot of nothing and continuing to wait this thing out. And, the Ravens have been able to proceed to some degree, with Beckham, and, they added Nelson Aguilar, and they'll they're scheduled to make 5 draft picks. I'm guessing they'll try to make another deal or two to add another pick or two, but it's still going to leave them on the other side of that, still having some questions as far as just where they are with their franchise quarterback. So again, my bet, my strong thought, my gut is he's going to be here for 2023, but that does not mean that there's going to be a long-term resolution. And going into that season, even if you have some short-term kumbaya, you still wonder how well and how conducive that's going to be to trying to maximize this team's championship run. But, we've continued to talk about that. We'll continue to talk about that. I mean, it's just where they are at this point in time. And at this point in time, and in the meantime, you have an Orioles club that is off to a good start, and they're not going to overtake the Ravens. Football's king, right? Not just here in Baltimore, but across the country as far as the NFL. But it is certainly you're taking notice that the Orioles are certainly grabbing some attention that would normally be on, much more of it on the Ravens in the draft this time of year, just because of the Lamar situation and how much uncertainty that's created for the franchise.
All right, Luke, I got to go. The flamingos are making too much noise behind me. I was vacationing until the Orioles pulled me off of vacation. Luke is here. I will not be vacationing beginning on Thursday. I'll be back at Captain Larry's doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery Window Nation. Also have some new sponsors for the Crab Cake Tour. Great new sponsors here. Want to remind everybody Hollywood Casino is a great place to check out the draft on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Great food, gambling, bet the games. Probably can bet on whether Lamar is going to be a Raven on Friday morning or not. I would say probably is, but that's why we watch. And in the meantime, the Orioles are playing the Red Sox. So tune in. Luke will be following all things Orioles baseball all week long, including root for the home team while they're home. So lots of folks going out to the ballpark and enjoying less than stellar weather where you are, at least for this week. I'll be bringing my good weather back home for all of us here this week. Baltimore Positives Alive. You'll get some best of this week. Peter Principles being re-released. Chapter 1 is out. I'm going to be doing more of that just to bring the young kids up on the history of Oriole baseball over the last 30 years or so. I am Nestor. He is Luke. Follow him at Baltimore Luke. You can follow me, Ness, at BaltimorePositive.com. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. Amongst the flamingos in parts unknown. I feel like the executioners. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive, even when the logo's missing.